Hi, I'm Eric Camino. I am PPMD's Director of Research and Clinical Innovation. Today I'm going to be discussing with you some considerations for participating in clinical trials. What I'm going to talk about is some general overview of clinical trials for rare disease, some things that you or your family may want to consider as you begin to search for clinical trials, and then some resources that PPMD has developed to help you find trials that may be right for you or for your child. So I want to start with what is the purpose of a clinical trial? And the goal with the clinical trial is for us to understand the effect of a drug or a device in a human population. So the way this is mostly manifested in Duchenne is the um, evaluation of the safety and efficacy of new or repurposed drugs. And so these are typically referred to as investigational products. Once something is approved and on the market, it is then termed as an approved product. Something to keep in mind as you are considering clinical trials is that clinical trials are still experiments. We don't know if the drug works at this point. That's why we are testing it in humans, is to see if it is efficacious, if it is safe. And so the data that's collected during these clinical trials are what allows for an investigational product to become an approved product as approved by the FDA or the EMA. Now, even though we say that, these are experiments, these are investigational products, there is oversight here. There are institutional review boards at the clinical trial sites, so the different hospital sites that you might be visiting have independent boards that review the protocols. And then in some instances, there are data and safety monitoring boards. So especially in phase 3 trials, which I will touch on in a second, these are groups of clinicians and researchers and patient advocates who get to see some of the data and help determine if trials are safe. So what are the phases of clinical trials? You are going to see this across multiple different presentations. The material that we have on our website also categorizes the different trials by phase. So when you hear someone talk about preclinical work, what they mean is this is the work that is done in the lab. So this might be investigating a small molecule in a petri dish or in animal studies to see if it has an effect on a particular target, if it looks like it's something that might work for humans. Now, once something has been identified, they might take it to a phase 1 clinical trial. So this is going to be the first in human. And the outcome in this that they are looking for is safety. So is the investigational product, this potential therapeutic drug, is it safe to give to humans? This can be tested in adults in a disease like Duchenne. It is a rare disease. It may be first tested in children. And then as you go through, that tends to be a really small number of patients in a phase 1 trial. A phase 2 is going to be a little bit larger. And these are often where some of the work being done, like dose finding, is performed. So dose finding being what is the optimal dose of the investigational product to be delivering to a patient. So what is the amount that is going to show a great effect while still being safe? Some of these studies may have placebo still included in a phase 2 trial. It depends on its design. And sometimes you'll see the phase 1 and the phase 2, that safety and things like dose finding combined into phase 1, 2 trials. There's a little more fluidity in the rare disease space. Phase 3 trials, these are the really large trials. They're often referred to as pivotal trial, and this is the trial where data is collected that is usually going to be shared with the other clinical trial data with the FDA or the EMA to go towards approval. And there's very likely to be a placebo group in these phase 3 trials. In Duchenne, that may be 150 to 250 patients in a study. If we go out to the non-rare disease space, something like looking at an investigational product in cancer, there's going to be a few thousand people in a phase 3. So these tend to be larger, though in rare diseases, our numbers still are relatively small. And then after approval, there are sometimes these phase 4 studies, and they're referred to as post-marketing or post-approval studies. You'll sometimes hear them referred to as registry studies. And so these are ways to continue assessment the assessment of the drug for safety and efficacy. And then I just wanted to touch on some other language that you're going to hear pretty frequently when you hear companies talk about clinical trials, when you hear investigators talk about the protocol for a given trial. One of the big ones is the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, and that is the set of requirements needed to be eligible for a trial. So this is what's going to decide whether you or your child will even be eligible to participate. And so this can include a wide range of things. I put some of the really common ones up here: age, ambulation status, steroid use. If it's a mutation-specific drug, that might be a requirement. And this really is decided by the design of the trial. So they're designing trials to have the greatest chance of showing efficacy, so that way a drug can get approved and that way we can get it to the whole Duchenne population. So if the investigational drug is looking at preserving muscle function, that may be easier to assess in younger ambulatory boys. So you might see the age restriction on the clinical trial in that 4 to 7 range. If it's a drug that's more interested in pulmonary function, they might look in to older non-ambulatory boys where we start to see a decline in pulmonary function. That way they can see, is the drug protecting that pulmonary function or slowing the decline or even improving it. You're going to hear placebo talked about a lot. And so that is just the inactive product that's given to patients, and that's to compare it to the investigational product. And that is so we have a really good sense if the investigational product is truly providing benefit. We don't want to have family members taking drugs if they're not working, and so this is one kind of tool that helps evaluate if the investigational product is actually working and if it's not something just like improved standard of care. The primary outcome measure is what is going to be used to show whether the investigational product is safe or effective. And so this is going to vary by study because it depends on what the investigational product may do. So different tests are going to be used as the primary outcome measure. Again, if it's a really early phase 1 study or possibly in the phase 2, these might be measures for safety. When we get into the phase 3, that's when you start to see the things that you're more familiar with, like a 6-minute walk test or a North Star ambulatory assessment. So measures that can say, we're slowing progression of disease, or we're stabilizing or even improving the progression of the disease. And then, of course, the other term you might hear is adverse events. And so these are going to be any of the unfavorable changes in a patient's health that are recorded during the course of the study. Now, adverse events don't always, or I should say, are not always related to the investigational product. Any adverse event has to be recorded as the trial is running, and then it is decided if that investigational product was causing it. So, if there was a series of headaches in some patients, they would need to evaluate, is that related to the drug, or, did that patient just naturally have headaches? And then there's a further, a more serious version of the adverse event, which is the serious adverse events, and these are adverse events that are considered life-threatening. Again, these may not be related to the investigational product, but they do need to be evaluated to see if it is from the investigational product. And sometimes you can have clinical trials that are put on hold due to serious adverse events while the sponsor evaluates what the cause was. So that was a pretty quick dive into some key areas within clinical trials. And now I want to talk about some things that are important for you and your family to consider if either you or your child is thinking about joining a clinical trial. So first I'm going to talk about the informed consent, and then we're going to get into some of the, the risks, the burdens, and the benefits of clinical trials. And so the informed consent is, it's a document that you're given at the start of a trial, and it needs to be signed in order for you to participate. And I'm dedicating a whole slide here because it's a really important aspect for you as you're kind of beginning to look into a clinical trial. It's going to contain a lot of information, the risks, the benefits, or potential risks and benefits, as well as the timeline of the study and what the schedule of visits are going to be. So there's a lot of information there. We really encourage you to get a copy, to review it with your family members, review it with your physician. You don't have to sign it, the first time that you see this document. Take some time, go through it. This is really your opportunity to ask questions of the research team. So this is the time to do it. So anything that you have questions about, this is the great time to ask. We do have a list of questions on our website that can maybe help get you thinking about some things to consider. But it's important to note that there really is no question that is too small in this period. Things like, are you going to help me cover the cost of gas to get to the clinical trial? That's important to know for some families. You may be interested in the side effects. If the phase 1 or phase 2 has already been completed, they might have some information on what was seen in previous participants, and they can tell you something like that. And if it's a phase 1, then ask about the what was seen in the preclinical. So really, again, anything you want to know more about the trial, this is really your time to have that dialogue. And then in certain instances, your child, if they are usually around 7 years or older, may be asked to sign the assent form. And this is just so that the investigator can help your child understand what they are agreeing to participate in. And so it should be language that is easy for them to understand. And that level of language is obviously going to change based on the age group they're enrolling in. A group of 7 and 8 year olds are going to need a different explanation than if you have some young men that are in their mid-teens. So I'm going to go through some of the things to consider and maybe spark some questions for yourself as you're looking at something like an informed consent. One of the risks of participating in clinical trials is, as I said earlier, these are investigational products, meaning they're still being tested to see if they are safe and effective. Now, there is obviously going to be some evidence that led to them moving it into a clinical trial, but we still need to further investigate this. So the product may not be better than your current standard of care. Depending on the trial, if there is a placebo arm, you may be randomized into that placebo group. That is not something you're likely to know. Those are typically blinded, meaning that you don't know what you're receiving, and the investigator also won't know what you're receiving. And that's just to prevent any bias. Now, in studies with placebo groups, there usually is a period when all of those that were on placebo will have access to that investigational product. So talk with the investigators, find out when in the timeline that is expected, and that can kind of help answer that question for you. And then, of course, with any investigational product and really any approved therapy, there may be unwanted or harmful side effects. So these are things to consider and to ask maybe what's expected. And then the other one that you will see often in that section of the exclusion criteria for a trial is that it may impact your ability to participate in other clinical trials. Oftentimes, you can only participate in one trial at a time, or I should say be on one investigational product at a time. And if you just finished a different trial or a trial closed, there may be a bit of a washout period. So this is, time for whatever investigational product you were taking to be, out of your system. So that way there isn't a confounding result from the new investigational product you're taking. And again, this is just to ensure that if there is a positive benefit or even an unwanted side effect, that we know it's from the investigational product that you're currently taking and not something that you have been taking in the past. There are some burdens with participating in clinical trials. There are costs associated with any study, things like paying for gas to get to the site. You may have to stay overnight in a hotel. There may be parking or food costs. Now, a lot of these typically are covered by the sponsor. So, again, ask during the consent process how this is going to be covered. It's pretty standard for a lot of these upfront costs for you to get to the trial site to be covered by the investigator. Some things that you may need to think about that aren't quite as obvious is childcare for your other children that aren't in the study. Different people have different support systems where they live, and so that might be something that you need to think about while you're participating in the trial. And then looking at that list of the study visits is a really important one. In order to make these study visits, you may have to take time off of work to be at the clinical site. And this might force you to use some vacation or personal leave time. For your child, or if you're an older individual with Duchenne, that might mean that you are going to miss out on school or some other activities with your peers. And these visits, they vary depending on the study. They might be multiple days, they might be weekly visits, they could just be monthly or every 3 months. This should be outlined, and if that can be helpful for you to make your decision. Just when you're looking at these, typically the first month or so of a clinical trial tends to have more visits as they're assessing, making sure that the drug is safe when you're taking it, and then they may be spaced out more. And the last one is, if you were looking for a very specific clinical trial, if there's an investigational product that you have identified as something that you or your child would like to participate in, they might not have a site near you, and that may then involve either really long car rides or airfare and travel. So just other things to consider as you're looking at clinical trials that are available. And then finally, the benefits. Why you may want to consider participating in a clinical trial. The first one, and probably the one that is the reason why most people participate, is this does give you access to an investigational product. So if these investigational products are providing benefit, this is a way to have access to that product before it has reached approval. Also, many studies offer open label extensions, and so these are studies that usually follow that initial study that you or your child may participate in, and it's a way to continue having access to that product after your initial participation has finished. So it's kind of an avenue to have access to things that you normally wouldn't. This is a really big benefit to the community. As we just went over some of the burdens, some of those burdens really do prevent families from participating. And that can be a challenge. And so, those families have to wait until something is approved to have access. So by participating in clinical trials, you are helping to get these products potentially approved into other families that don't have the means to participate. I was talking about in the phase 3 study that sometimes these studies have 150 to 200, 250 patients required, and that's based off of things called power calculations. In order to speed along the development and the drug development pathway, your participation in getting to that enrollment number is going to allow these trials to assess efficacy and safety faster. And that means we can see if a drug is working or not even faster, and potentially move it along to approval. And then lastly, another big one is access to medical experts and standard of care. So these visits may occur outside of your typical 6-month or 12-month visits. So that's getting you some more interaction with your providers. And then depending on the trial you're in, you may be at a different clinical trial site than your normal your normal care center. And this means that you're getting to interact with some other physicians and other experts in the field, and outside of your traditional care team. And some families do see that as an added bonus. And we also have another list of things to consider in terms of the risks, the burdens, and the benefits on the PPMD website. So if you're interested and you haven't participated in trials before, I would really encourage you to go look through that and discuss that with your family and your care team. And then lastly, I want to share some of the resources that PPMD has developed for you and your family to find clinical trials. So first we have our interactive drug pipeline, which was launched in September of 2019. And so this page really details where these different investigational products are in the drug development pathway. So if you go to nduchenne.org/pipeline or on Parent Project MD, if you go under research, you can find the pipeline, and it is going to list all the different investigational products that are currently being investigated. It'll show where they're at in development, so what phase of clinical trial they are currently in. And then if you click on any one of those, you're given very family-friendly language explaining what the drug is targeting and what we expect the benefit to be, as well as any material that sponsor has done with PPMD. So past webinars are there, so you can watch them, you can learn more. It's really great if you're trying to decide between a couple of different trials as to which one you may be interested in. When you're trying to find what trial to join, we do have a trial finder tool. Again, as on here, it's nduchenne.org/explore trials, or it can be found under the research tab on the PPMD website. And this groups trials by different recruitment statuses. So there is a tab for currently recruiting trials, and that's probably where you'll want to go if you're looking to join a trial, and you can sort by a number of different things. So you can sort by age, you can sort by ambulation status, if you need to be on steroids or you need to be steroid naive, and then that can link you back to that individual product's pipeline page so you can learn more about the different products. And then there's also just other information on there about trials that are in preparation, the trials that are currently ongoing that have reached enrollment, just so you can be aware of what's happening in Duchenne. And then lastly, just make one final plug for the Duchenne registry. If you sign up on there and you put in yourself or your child's information, whenever recruitments emails are sent through the Duchenne registry, they are targeted. And so that means that if a trial is only looking for boys that are 12 and up, and you have a child that is 7 years old, you are not going to see that trial for 12 and up. That way you're only seeing trials that you have a potential opportunity to join, so you don't get inundated with kind of random trials in the Duchenne landscape. So I think that's a really great tool, and so you can sign up for that on the DuchenneRegistry.org. And then if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me at eric@parentprojectmd.org. And please visit the website. We have a plethora of information on our research tab about clinical trials. Thanks.